cloud is also not for everybody. So I have to follow up with rule number one, because you're already too cool, you make people jealous and they hate you when you walk into the room. So why add to that animosity? Or the more practical one, your business relies on real-time processing. The perfect example is for this, we have hedge funds that are heavy trading funds. They get data in from Bloomberg that pulls right into an Excel spreadsheet. That Excel spreadsheet has 500 worksheets or what have you that have pivot tables that process information like that. And they're making trades based on pennies. It used to be fractions, but now it's pennies. And because it's pennies, time is actually of more of an essence in that regard, because things will move a lot faster. So if they have to process that information like that, well, they can't go to the cloud. Speed of light is great, but you still have to travel, you still have to have a machine process it, and then you still have to return the answer. That's better done locally, not in the cloud. So if you have that kind of capability or that kind of requirement, it's better done in-house. Yes, sir?
Bloomberg is almost universally used application in the financial world. Is it ever going to the cloud?
Well, yeah, there's a thing. They asked if Bloomberg, which is a financial data service, is ever going to the cloud. There is. There's a Bloomberg Anywhere that is not based on the installation.
Well, that uses Citrix to bring it to your screen.
Right.
But I don't know if that's going to convince people to go over to a non-dedicated console.
Probably not. Again, because of the speed of the transmissions, the speed of the data that is required, but actually it's the speed of the processing of the information. So when you get the Bloomberg market feed in, if you're following data on a particular stock, or you're following the quotes on a particular stock, and you have a Excel spreadsheet that you plug that data into, and your business model is based on
Where does that Excel spreadsheet reside?
That spreadsheet resides locally on the machine.
Why does it have to reside locally?
Because if you did it in the cloud, you're going to have to go back out and process out there and then bring the results back.
Then why can't you run Excel on a virtual operating system?
Oh, you could, but that's for our perspective, that's not cloud. Really, when we talk about the cloud here, I'm sorry, I should have made that clear. I'm talking of a public variety in that regard. That will probably exist at some point, but as of right now, it's not mature enough to exist. There are a lot of virtual desktop providers out there. In fact, we have one based in Virginia that's actually pretty good. But none of the financial guys are going to trust that their Citrix connection, which is basically taking an image of a machine that resides down in Virginia and then bringing the results back to them. They still have to do that. There's still a lag in there. You're still going to get a second or two lag. If you're trading on a penny and you have to make 26 cents, a trade at 26 cents, and a second later it's at 27 cents, well, then you've just blown your model. And these are for heavy traders. These aren't guys that are long traders that trade maybe once a month or what have you. These are guys who are doing hundreds of transactions a day. So in that regard, they're not going to trust that kind of connection. They're going to trust the fact that the market data comes into their machine right here, the transaction's done right on their machine, and the trade is processed through their middle office application right then and there. So there's still a lag on certain things. There's still reasons to put it in there until guys trust that they're going to get the same kind of results by going to that virtual desktop. They're not going to go that way. JP Morgan actually has a thin client environment where they actually do some of this work like that, but they haven't even deployed it. I mean, they've been testing that for about 11 years now. They haven't even deployed it fully to all their trading desks. But it does work. You are right. It does work. But it's also a mindset. There's also a bias to it and what have you, and a comfort level. Yes?
I was going to mention, I think you touched on something I said. And yes, within your environment, you might have the speed that you need, but you're still communicating via T1 or whatever means to talk to the
Right. I mean,
so in that case, putting your servers within a cloud environment, which I think a lot of that has been done today. You could call an exchange, I believe, where your server is closer to the
right. Closer to the exchange downtown and what have you. Sure. I mean, there are a lot of that's why you find a lot of data centers in Lower Manhattan, because people put their machines down there and what have you. Yeah, proximity. Physical proximity is still an issue. I mean, the closer you are, the faster your transactions are going and what have you. That's more of a private cloud setup. I mean, that's been in existence since the 1970s when the mainframes were first built downtown and what have you, and specialists were transacting business on the exchange. Because there was actually a human lag on that. Now that everything has gone computerized and what have you, having the servers downtown actually is a private cloud setup. However, the models that are telling...
Sorry, would you consider that a private cloud or a more community cloud? Because it's not owned by the trading shop.
Well, a lot of them are. I mean, a lot of them are have their servers co-load in a data center. They may not own the data center, but they own the machines that are in the data center.
So that would be considered a private cloud?
That we consider a private cloud.
Okay.
Because, I mean, put it to you this way, Merrill Lynch actually on the teleport on Staten Island, Merrill Lynch owns, or it's now Bank of America unless they sold it and what have you, they own their own data center down there. But it was a disaster recovery data center. The reason why, if everybody remembers 9/11, the reason why the exchange took such a hit is because they had so many trading machines. People had so many trading machines down there that a lot of the trading machines and a lot of the connections were wiped out. So that's why there was a rule, there was a proposed rule after 9/11 that you had to have a real time. Now, this shows you that a bureaucrat came up with this, but a real-time data center 50 miles away that could, the moment you made a transaction here, it was supposed to show up here. Well, that just wasn't possible back then. It's still not possible. There's still going to be a 3-second, 5-second delay to get everything coinciding along those lines. That's why when we tell people about a disaster recovery site, we talk about the blast radius. The blast radius of a nuclear bomb is about 25 miles. It's a little bit more, but 25 miles is what we put in. So we take the center of Times Square, and you do a 25-mile radius. And if people really want a pure disaster recovery and business continuity set up, you put your data center somewhere outside that 25-mile radius. Part of the problem is somewhere in that other 25 miles, another bomb's going to fall. So you can only go so far. In that regard, and we're getting a little bit more technical on that front. Yes, there are private cloud systems already existing down there. However, most funds, most private equity firms that are not private equity firms, most broker dealers that are doing anything that are real-time communications are still keeping their stuff in-house. But I agree with you. Eventually, it's going to migrate out. It just makes too much sense. It's getting over the mindset that I don't have the machine here, and I'm not looking at the machine that's here, which is what we're still getting over. I mean, there's still a psychological deal about the security and what have you. I tell people, how much money do you spend on your IT a year? And then how much money does Google or Microsoft or Cisco spend on their IT security a year? And I say, comparatively speaking, it's as safe as the cloud as it is sitting on your server. Or even better, on the laptop that you're taking with you that you may end up leaving in a cab, and your password is password to get into. Or as one of my clients did, put their social security number as their password, which I love. You require extensive customization. Jose, we were talking about this. Microsoft has an application called SharePoint. It's a document collaboration site. You can do wonderful things with it. I mean, you can customize it until the cows come home and what have you. But the online version of it, you can do about 25% of that customization. So for your setup, that's not going to work. So if you need extensive customization, the other thing with email, if you need extensive customization of your email, a host of variety is not going to work. This is working across a horizontal, not necessarily a vertical structure. So that's one of the things that you have to be cognizant of on your business side is what you really need an application to do. You must meet government rules and regulations. This is actually becoming less and less of a concern, but it's still a concern. HIPAA is a concern. A bunch of the SEC, FINRA, and PCI are still a concern when it comes to cloud-based services and what have you. You must ask your provider, when you're talking from a legal perspective, how they cover themselves. So QuickBooks Online does credit card processing. If you have QuickBooks Online, you store the credit card on your account. Technically, you're storing it with Intuit. That means Intuit has to meet the PCI rules and regulations for storing that credit card information, because technically you're not storing it on your systems. So in that regard, those are questions that you have to ask them if they meet those requirements. HIPAA is a big issue because of the physical security requirements. There are actual physical security requirements. So where the servers sit, who has access to them, what's the lock, the type of lock that is on the cage or the cabinet that is housing the servers, what's the type of access from the internet, what's the type of firewall and what have you. Those are actually built into the HIPAA compliance. So if you don't actually meet those, then you're out of compliance on that. HIPAA's been around now for 10 years, 11 years, 9 years, something like that. There's never been one HIPAA case brought against anybody as of yet. Even though people have claimed medical records have been stolen, have hacked, and what have you, there's never been a HIPAA case brought by the government. This is the other thing. It goes back to your first question about bandwidth. The more data that you move across the wire, the bigger your bandwidth has to be. If you can't afford or you don't have the ability to bring increased bandwidth into your environment, a cloud-based service may not be for you.
I'm thinking, take a guy who edits videos. He might have videos going up and down. That's a lot of requirement. But if he's watching those videos and they're somewhere else and it's just transmitting the picture of the screen, if you will, to him, that's probably less bandwidth.
Actually, the question was about bandwidth and media content, especially videos. If you go to YouTube, you're still streaming that down over your connection. Granted, you're not bringing the file down, you're not downloading the file, but you're still streaming. We had a media company, we have a media company. One of their biggest bandwidth hogs used to be BitTorrent, and now it's a service called Radio, RDIO, which is a streaming service, and it hogs their bandwidth. Streaming hogs bandwidth, especially of audio, media files, and what have you. But you are correct. If you're actually sending the files, yes. I mean, that's going to pound your bandwidth, and you really can't do a cloud-based service if you're transmitting that unless you're going to have separate connections. And you dedicated one for one and two for your cloud-based service and what have you. And that's why I bring up, there is a cost involved in your circuit. Because your lifeblood now becomes the internet connection to your service, you have to make sure that that circuit is stable. You have to make sure it's solid. You may have to have redundant circuits just to make sure everything stays up. And in so doing, you increase your cost. If that cost is more than the savings you're going to recognize on your cloud-based services, well, then it doesn't necessarily work for itself. So again, these are areas that you have to think about, but bandwidth is a key one, especially stable bandwidth. I mean, anybody who's ever been in a building that has old copper in there and constantly have your T1 drop or what have you, or flake out on you, knows how aggravating that is. Well, think about that if your entire world is based on your connection to the internet as opposed to a server that's in a room next to you. Then your life becomes a little bit different. So that's why we tell people bandwidth is a key deal. If you can't stand to have your bandwidth go down because your line of business can keep functioning even if you don't have internet connectivity, then the cloud probably is not going to be the right thing for you. I have a couple more slides to get through, and then we'll be done. And by the way, you've been a great audience. Thanks very much.